This is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. If you're watching today on YouTube, I'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to like and subscribe on the video, as this helps motivate YouTube to spread the video to a wider audience. If you're listening to this on a podcast app, you can subscribe on the podcast app itself, or you can go to simplicityzen.com and subscribe there, as well as see other guests that we've had on this show. Today, my guest is Rinzai priest, Rinzan Pechovnik.
Great start. Rinzan, it's Rinzan
Okay.
Pechovnik.
Okay, I'm
Everyone
just
gets
horrible
it wrong.
pronouncing things.
Worry about it.
It is what it is. Rinzan began his training with the Zen Community of Oregon in 2003, studying under Hogan and Chozen Bays. He did his first session that year and received Jukai from Hogan Bays in 2005. In 2008, Rinzan traveled to China where he studied Buddhist traditions and toured and sat zazen at numerous monasteries and Buddhist sites. While still a member of the Zen Community of Oregon, Rinzan served on the board of directors and completed training as a lay Sangha leader. He left Zen Community of Oregon and began training under Genjo Marinello in 2012. Was ordained under him in 2013 and received Inka, or Dharma transmission, in 2019. Rinzan founded No Rank Zendo in Portland, Oregon, where he leads sesshin and offers traditional Rinzai koan study. Professionally, Rinzan is a licensed psychotherapist. Thank you for being here today with us.
My pleasure.
Okay. Could you, if I got any of that wrong, will you correct it? Besides, I guess pronunciation too.
No, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, for some reason, I have a real hard time pronouncing unusual words that I haven't said out loud multiple times. So
well, everyone gets Pechovnik wrong. When I meet somebody who pronounces Pechovnik correctly the first time, it's rare. I mean, it's happened fewer than 10 times.
Is it Polish?
It is Slovenian. My grandmother and grandfather both emigrated from Slovenia back in like 1911 or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Sacramento, California.
Okay.
And more specifically, because you're down there, is Carmichael, California. And
right.
So that's where I spent most of my life. Went to college at UC Davis, floated around a little bit, but eventually ended up here in Portland.
Mm-hmm. So your parents were born in the United States, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
My father would be first generation Slovenian. Was bilingual, grew up in a very impoverished part of Minnesota, had a very rough, impoverished childhood. And my mother, typical Midwestern, multiple generations getting here, but she Irish German, but her family had been here for a couple generations.
Were those cultures influential on your upbringing at all? Did you have the grandparents
my grandfather died. This is an interesting fact. My grandfather died the night I was conceived. So there's always this joke that I was the reincarnation of my grandfather, setting me up for a life of Buddhism or Asian religious practices. But there was always a joke floating around there with regard to that. But the fact that my name was unusual and that my grandmother, who lived in Minnesota while I was in California, didn't speak any English. She knew hardly any English at all. And my father having a lot of stories about home and the hardships and giving me just little bits of Slovenian to learn. I was aware less of the culture, but more of of the kind of immigrant status. I would never regard myself as an immigrant. I'm a white male, and I don't look different than anyone else. But there's always been a sense of arrival and not necessarily a long heritage as an American. So I would say the immigrant status influenced me more than the culture of Slovenia. And then there was also a strong ethnic Irish German. My grandmother was fully German. My grandfather fully Irish on the other side. And there was just a lot of talk about the Irish and what have you.
Would you go to any cultural centers or ethnic churches or anything like that?
No, I was raised Catholic, and we had just a little suburban Catholic church, St. John's Church, there in Carmichael that we attended.
Yeah, no.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, right
I
next
think.
to the Elks Club.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Catholic Church in Carmichael, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean there, but no, not really. And my father who lived such a life of poverty, really. I mean, he had seven brothers and they shared a bed together.
Oh wow.
And I mean, he was very impoverished, and he was happy to leave all that behind,
Mhm.
and really just, you know, succeed and live in suburban California and take on the middle class life. So there was no there, you know, there was really no sense of preserving or holding on to the culture. In fact, years after my grandmother had died, before my father had died, he said, you know, I don't even remember any Slovenian. He says it would take me a little while to get back to it.
What kind of career did he do?
My father,
Hmm.
he was an assessor, a county assessor. So he went around for Sacramento County, and you know, evaluated the worth of people's homes so that they could appraise it and put proper taxes on it.
Hmm. Was your mom a homemaker? Did she work from home? Did she go out and work?
She initially she was a homemaker, and then my father was working elsewhere and got laid off, and they needed income, and so then my mother started working at that point. She worked at AAA, and then became a travel agent at AAA, which was quite exciting for her, and eventually opened up her own travel agency. And to this day, at 80, she is still selling travel and working as a travel agent, leading tours, and at a much slower pace than she used to, but continues to do that.
Hmm. And so you guys would go to the Catholic Church. Was that a weekly thing for you guys?
I mean, this is an interesting part of who I am and what my life is. I was always a very religious kid. I was
Mhm.
enthralled by. We had a children's Bible, and I was enthralled by the pictures and the stories in the children's Bible. And I used to have a collection of audio cassettes that I would you could plug into your cassette player, and then look at little comic books that would tell you Bible stories. And I
Mhm.
was just enthralled by it. I just loved it. And even like Christmas, I loved the religious aspects of it.
Mhm.
And going to the Catholic Church, even when we were in, we go to a larger cathedral in Oakland where my grandparents, my mother's parents lived, and when we would attend there, I was just enthralled by the iconography, the imagery. To
Mhm.
this day, if I go somewhere that has a Catholic feel, it's just like I feel like I'm at home.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I was rebellious and wanted nothing to do with it. It was a strange dichotomy inside of me. So we would go every Sunday, and I hated going, and
Mhm.
I didn't want to go. So it's a strange mix of just this being enthralled with myth, with story, with the sense of a power beyond us, a presence beyond the everyday, that has stayed with me my whole life. And as a young, I mean, I'm talking about very young, I didn't have objections to the institution of Catholicism. I knew nothing about it, but maybe just because I was a kid, I hated going. And so at one and the same time, I was asking my parents for religious resources. I remember I had the collection of these audio tapes, and it only covered the Old Testament. And I wanted the New Testament too. I wanted the rest. And
Mhm.
we didn't have Amazon then. They couldn't find it on the internet or something. And they're like, oh, we can't find the New Testament. And I was always disappointed. Or I wanted my dad to read me the Bible stories out of this children's book. And I remember him once reading David and Goliath, and David cuts off Goliath's head, and my father going, oh, this is too gory for me. I can't read it anymore. And I'm like, but it's the Bible, but we should read it. And then at the same time, we were going to, and I went through catechism. And so I must have been 7, 8 years old, maybe 7 at this point. And I remember specifically saying to my mother and father one Sunday morning, you know, God is everywhere, correct? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, if God is everywhere, why do we have to go to that building every Sunday to worship God? Couldn't I worship God in my own way right here, right now? And I have a distinct memory, whether it's true or not, I'm not sure, but it was a distinct memory of my father saying, Mark's got a good point. Why don't we just worship God in our own way at home on Sunday morning? And so we stopped going, and we would only go when we went to Oakland and participated. And so that was my apostasy. That was kind of the end of my Catholic religious training. Still had a great interest in religions in general. And there's a period in my life when I had an older brother who died when I was 14. He was 18. He died in a car wreck. Pivotal time in my life. and put on a crucifix at that time, just wanting to hold on to something that gave me a sense of other that might free me from the pain. So yes, we had it. And then another story along those lines was that we used to pray every evening before a meal. Classic prayer, bless us, O Lord, for these thy gifts. And I remember one day saying, I'm going to just pray inside my head. I don't want to have to pray out loud anymore. I'm just going to pray in my head. And they were like, well, you should pray with us. I said, but I'm going to pray in my head. And I refused to pray. And my dad says, I think he's got a point. Let's all just pray in our heads. And I have a story that he was complicit in this and happy to take a step back. So there's my early Catholicism as well as my rebellion from the church.
Would you pray on your own, like in your room at night or anything like that?
Yes and no. I quite distinctly remember that when I said that, it was because I just didn't want to do it. I wanted to eat, and I would just sit quietly and not pray. But there were other times when, with a kind of obsessive compulsive behavior, that I became fearful that if I didn't recite the Lord's Prayer, that bad things would happen to me. I mean, I'm talking as a young kid, and so there were periods where I would recite it at a certain time every day, actually out of a fear and a sense of a ritualized sense that God was watching me. And if I didn't say this prayer, bad things would happen. And sure enough, if it started to rain on my baseball game, I was, and I forgot to pray that day. And so some of that, but not the earnest kind of prayer that you would expect from an earnest practicing Christian.
Did you think in just terms of like God in general, or would you think of Jesus, like pray to Jesus and think about?
No, not so much Jesus. It was always God. It was not so much Jesus at all.
What were your teenage years like? Obviously, they were kind of initiated with tragedy.
They were definitely initiated with tragedy. I want to take a step back. I have an interesting story that connects with this, as well as it connects with my connection with Buddhism. Is
Okay.
at the same time as I was a kid, my father had a cologne bottle that was in the shape of a Buddha. And I would always ask him, who is that? What's going on here? And I think he stumbled and tried to explain as best as he could. That's the Buddha. And he was like an enlightened being. And people, I think he said, pray and worship the Buddha. And so I was like, who is this guy? But as a youngster, because this was the early 70s, I was very religious. I was enthralled with Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell, these two musicals that were out at the time. And I remember watching Godspell and I've watched it since, and I'm not so moved anymore. But at the time, I watched Godspell and I was quite moved and wanted to be good. I just remember finishing, I want to be good and I want to not cause harm. And I did a little thought experiment in my head that was, how does one not cause harm? And I realized this like a 7 or 8 year old, vibrant point in my life. I realized that no matter what anyone does, you're going to cause harm. There's no escaping causing harm. And I thought, what could I do? I really want to cause as least harm as possible. And I had an image of myself going to school the next day and just sitting cross-legged in the playground. It was just like, I'll just sit cross-legged and not do anything. And I'll just sit there. And I had this distinct image of that's what I would do. And I don't think it was connected with the cologne bottle or anything. I knew nothing about what that was about. But it was very interesting when years and years later, I became a practicing Buddhist. I was like, that seed was planted. That was planted very, very early.
That's almost like, is that I'm probably going to pronounce wrong, the Jains, the Johns, that's kind of their thing, like reduce your activity so you're not hurting anything.
Yeah. Well, and I think in my mind, that is it's the activity of any religion that has any renunciant kind of flavor. The Jains, as I understand that it's pronounced, the Jains take that to a far, far extreme. But I would say that our own Buddhist practice is I need to restrain my impulses and restrain myself so as not to cause harm to myself or to others. And I would say that the seated posture of Zazen is the practice of the least activity in order that we can get clarity. And through that non-harming activity of just sitting and just being, something new can emerge from that. So I would say that while the Jains take it to an extreme, it's certainly part of our practice and part of other religious practices as well.
Yeah, and someone with a traditional Buddhist cosmological point of view would probably think, you were probably an advanced Buddhist in a previous life, and you're kind of have some storehouse consciousness seeds kind of bursting forth there at a really young age.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree with them. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Who knows what it is? It's one mind, and the threads of Buddhist practice and threads of practice twine into us. We're not the cause of our own lives. We're not the cause of our own practice. There's circumstances and things arise, and I think we can just sit and be in amazement with it. I will tell you the other early Buddhist story I have, which again didn't mean anything at the time, and for years didn't until I started training, was that my father found on the roof of the house, as if it had descended from the heavens, a little orange plastic Buddha on a tether. That he said, I found this on the roof, and he gave it to me. I said, how did it get up on the roof? He says, I don't know. Maybe it fell from the heavens and the Buddha dropped it so that you could have it. And I was like, great. I'm dancing, and I put it around my neck, and I was just like wearing this Buddha around. I must have been 5 at the time. And one of the neighborhood kids saw it, and he grabbed it and he yanked it off of me. And he says, that was mine. And I just, as a 5-year-old, I'm bursting into tears. And I just remember the pain of it being torn apart. And again, at the time, I lost a toy and it made me cry. But it's interesting in hindsight, I could say, that was my first experience of, or one of my early experiences of dukkha and suffering. And, that the loss of attachment to anything causes pain, even the loss of our practice or our attachment to some Buddha figure.
So I'm curious, at a personal level, what is your view of transmigration? Do you think it's a metaphor? Do you think it's a cosmological reality? I mean, what do you think?
The way that, in my view, it's a view, and the way I orient towards it is, first, and this all gets stinky and theoretical, is that it's all one thing, it's all one mind. And so it's a big mix of things. And in this mix of things, just as in the material world, if my computer or my cushion that I'm sitting on or this house dissolves, the basic stuff of it dissolves and reforms into new things. And so that happens in the material world. We're well aware of it, and we're quite familiar with it.
Yeah, we're literally stardust.
We're literally stardust.
Yeah.
And it also happens in the other so-called realms in terms of thought, emotion, memory, experience of everything. Thought isn't stored in matter, at least they haven't proven that it is. Thought is thought, and experiences are experiences. And to my orientation, that when one dies, or our karma, if we can call thought karma karma, it dissolves and clumps back together. And sometimes it clumps back together in ways that somebody is carrying forth almost what might seem like transmigration or reincarnation. It was my grandpa, and boy, there's so many things this isn't true, but I'm a reincarnation from my grandpa, and there's so many things I remember that I shouldn't remember, but I do anyway. It's just a clump of information, but the clumps merge, and it's not singular to singular migration. It's just a reclumping of information. So some people have temperament or karma that is a stronger clumping along certain lines than other people. And I base this also on in terms of the research that has been done on reincarnation, where kids often have these profound reincarnation experiences, and they're often trying to interpret it as soul to soul, soul to body migration. But then it falls apart because they're saying he knows so much about this, but other things he gets wrong that don't align with this life, but they seem to be part of a different life. And so I just say it's a clumping effect. We get some things from some people and others from others. And when I die, everything dissolves and goes out and reclump in different forms. So yes, there are streams that branch out, recombine, and branch out again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I remember being a little kid, and my earliest memory of looking in the mirror, thinking, that's not what I look like. Like, I was certain that's not what I looked like, like not like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm surprised I look like that. It was like, that's not what I look like,
That's not the right me. Yeah, these experiences are uncanny. And there's evidence. I mean, that people know things that we're not supposed to know, and it's all one mind and it's all one thing. And the thing is not to get too caught up in any of it. I mean, if we get too preoccupied in where did I come from and it doesn't help us be effective human beings today. And that's what it all boils down to. I think it can be helpful to say, who I am and whatever uh, skills I have or gifts that have been given me are just clumped together, and I feel fortunate in that. I don't lay claim to them, so I think it can be helpful in that way.
Could you describe a little bit what your teenage years were like? Like I mentioned, it's kind of initiated with tragedy, so I'm sure that colored it significantly.
It was, initiated in tragedy and profoundly altering. There's cultures where people die all the time, and in our culture they don't. And so the loss of my older brother at a vital age, a time in my life, transitioning into adolescence, was just crucial. I mean, it's something that is really not understood or talked about, is that the loss of an older brother for a younger brother, or an older sibling from a younger sibling who, I'm not tracking my parents as a little kid as much as I'm tracking my big brother. I'm not being guided by my parents so much as I'm tracking my big brother to see how things are done and what to do, and seeking his approval and all that. And so the loss of a big brother, I'm not saying it's more profound, but it's uniquely profound and profound. The loss of an older brother, especially at that stage, at any stage, but I think it was just an awful time for it. As I was entering into high school, I was leaving junior high, Will Rogers High School, leaving 8th grade and going to a high school that's now shut down, La Sierra High School. And that was the high school where he was at, much appreciated, much loved, and had a lot of friends there. And so he had died like 2 weeks before I started my freshman year in high school. So then 2 weeks also before I turned 15, died in a car wreck. He was a reckless driver, and he killed himself because he ran a red light. We know he ran a red light. I suspect he was racing to get home because his little digital watch, which you had to press down 2 or 3 buttons to make the timer start the time, was turned on. And so he was seeing how quickly he could get home from a friend's house, and decided to 2 o'clock in the morning, red light, and it killed him. I had already started using marijuana, but I had been using marijuana, and the night that my brother died, I also got caught for using marijuana for the first time. And so it was quite a tumultuous night. And the next day I decided I would quit smoking pot and, try to live a good life. And that lasted about a month before the pain and the discomfort and the squeeze of all of these things was too much. And I was literally smoking pot all the time as a teenager, and pretty much throughout that first year as a teenager. And then quit smoking pot. I had a moment of clarity where I said, if I continue this, my life's going nowhere, and it's a long life and it should go somewhere. And so I quit smoking pot, but then quickly started drinking, and drank for a while before quitting both of those. And as my story goes on, then I picked up drinking again and was alcoholic, and I'm in recovery today. But those are the beginnings of seeking a different way of finding peace or relief or getting out of it all, was through drugs and alcohol. And I was lonely and in pain and bitter. And that sums up my high school years. And I did a lot of artwork as about the only relief. I was doing visual arts, painting and sculpture, and I had a lot of promise in that area. A lot of people really fully anticipated me that I would go off in that direction. Rushing ahead, when I went to university, I got in in studio art. I didn't have great grades, but the art department liked me and they wanted me in because
where did you go? You went to
UC Davis.
Oh, Davis, that's right. Which
Yeah,
is not a
great art mecca, but they had some very serious artists there who I wanted to work with. I did that for a year, and then suddenly art was like, I don't know why I'm doing art. I'm not at all interested in art. Decided I wanted to be a novelist and spent like a decade trying to write novels. And I was drunk and hungover and not able to do anything really. A line in the midst of all that as I continued to study religions. This concern with religion never left me. And so I read Mircea Eliade and Joseph Campbell, and read the Bible from cover to cover, just in part so I could say I've read the Bible from cover to cover, and all sorts of commentaries and this and that. And in the midst of all this study, I remember having a conversation with somebody and saying, if I had to pick a religion, I would pick Zen. I would pick Zen Buddhism.
How did you
And they
know
said,
about it?
I knew about it primarily. Well, okay, I'll take a couple steps back again. In my high school years, my family knew that I was struggling, though they never addressed it directly, my extended family on my mother's side. And I had an aunt and uncle who I think figured that I was smoking pot and figured that I was trying to quit. They're paying attention to me. Nothing's being talked about, but they knew I was suffering, and they were children of the 70s, so they're interested in transcendental meditation and read it, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and they'd given me a bunch of books on meditation. I've forgotten about this, so I'm glad that I'm coming back to it. They'd given me a bunch of books on meditation, and one of the books in meditation said, if you meditate, the world will be brighter and more colorful and more full and rich than if you were dropping acid. And I was like, that's what I want. I want psychedelics. And so I started meditating, actually, that after my brother died and I was trying to quit smoking pot, I started meditating, and I did it for about a month just on my own. And Carmichael, California, we didn't have a Buddhist temple down by the corner, not like we do in Portland. I learned there's 32 centers here in Portland. But I started meditating based on these books, and I got a flavor for it. I got a taste of stilling my mind and the spaciousness and the pristine presence that is aroused in that space. And I found myself going to school in distress and just stilling my mind. And so I could find calm there. And then I hit some barriers, and I didn't have any guidance in terms of what to do with meditation. So, I went back to smoking pot and just being a teenager, which was more fun than sitting in my room. And so they had given me books, and so I knew about meditation and some Zen there. They weren't great books. Some of the books were actually pretty bad. But I had started to learn some of these tools and techniques that can help move one. And I wouldn't say any of it was that I read, was more than this is how to meditate. These are things that you can do. The thing that really stood out for me in terms of I would pick Zen was an article, as an essay in one of Joseph Campbell's books, where he speaks of Eno, the sixth ancestor, and the lines that are written on the wall, about the Bodhi tree and the mind, and always keep it dusted clean. And Eno's response, which is there's what mind, what Bodhi tree, and on what dust are we wiping away? And something in that just really struck deep. And it's a koan, and I couldn't speak to it, but I was just like, that has the flavor that I want. I knew nothing about Zen or practices, but I was like, if I have to pick a religion, it will be Zen. And years later, when I got sober, I said, I better pick a religion because I'm falling to pieces. The alcohol isn't working anymore. I started smoking pot again, and thought this isn't going to work. My wife was ready to leave me. We had 2 young kids, and I said, this is not going to work. I need to quit. And I quit cold turkey immediately, and had a huge rebound in terms of the chemicals that made me manic for a long period of time. I was going crazy. Went to a psychotherapist who said, start meditating. And suddenly all this came back. If I need to pick a religion, it'll be Zen. I was like, I need to pick a religion. And so I started studying and training in Zen.
So what career did you choose in college? Like, what were you doing work-wise?
I was initially in college, I was initially a art studio major. And then I quit art studio and I got a degree, a double degree. This is not career, in philosophy and history. And then I graduated and watered plants for a period of time. But that's why I was interested in study and learning. So I studied history and philosophy, and with no clear, I wanted to be a novelist is what I wanted to do. I wanted to write novels and write literature.
What kind of work? I mean, what was your career when you were helping support a wife and kids?
I was an alcoholic, and I did everything I could not to work. It's a Tom Waits line, working hard, hardly working. And so I did everything I could not to work, and married, and we had kids unexpectedly and early. And I was the stay-at-home dad. And I didn't drink during the day when I was caring for the kids, but I would write watch the kids and kind of get writing done and do what I could, never feeling really great, and then care for the kids. And then once my wife was home, start drinking every night. And so my wife was making the income. I had a few odd jobs here and there, like I did paste up at a newspaper. I did there were jobs that didn't hold me too tightly. I hated, this is a whole different thread of my karma, but I did not want to be bound and by anything. I wanted to maintain my freedom also. But I was a newspaper reporter for a while doing freelance and made some money that, but didn't do much anything. I did a little bit of tutoring kids, but honestly, not much anything until I got sober.
And where did you live through all this?
Initially, my wife Anna and I met and married and lived for about 4 years in Sacramento, what is now Antelope. It was an unincorporated, so it's Antelope, Sacramento, for those tracking. And then I decided I wanted to find Mayberry. I wanted to find some rural, loving, pastoral place where I could be more with the salt of the earth. And we looked all over the place. We looked up here in Oregon. It didn't seem very doable, and ended up moving to a place called Goshen, Indiana, where my wife completed her degree in nursing. And it's a Mennonite community, some conservative Mennonite, but liberal Mennonite community. And so it's a liberal part of the Midwest, which here in Portland would be called moderate or even slightly conservative, because I live in a very liberal, what some would say radical part of the country right now. But we lived there for 8 years. And that's where I did the newspaper writing and had a few odd jobs while raising the kids, homeschooling the kids. So it wasn't drunkenness all the time, but I mean, that was a big piece. It was avoidance. I didn't want to have to work. I wanted to be a novelist. I did a lot of drinking, a lot of romantic ideas of how brilliant and wonderful I was as a novelist, when none of it was really true. Never got any short story, anything published. If I look back at it now, it's with some embarrassment. We were in Goshen, Indiana for 8 years. And there's a moment I remember turning to my wife. We were going camping and we were driving back. And I said, if we don't leave Indiana now, we're not leaving, because the kids are of an age that we need to leave. And they were 10, 11 years old. And so almost sight unseen, we moved out here to Portland, Oregon. And we've been here for over 20 years now.
What was the appeal of Portland?
I don't know. It's another one of those strange karmic things. Back when I was in college, I had a professor who said that he was from Portland. He told me about it. I said, man, that sounds like a place I'd love to live. I came up here and lived for about a month or two and couldn't really get my feet under me and felt lonely and sad and went back to Sacramento to be with people. But I had been there here that time, liked it. And then Anna and I thought about moving up here, but it was too urban for me at the time. It's not a terribly urban city, but I wanted countryside. Those romantic notions, but it was just something inside me. I mean, I don't know if you can tell, it's overcast in the beginning of June right now. It's cool, unlike the rest of the world. And of course, that's changing. It's not as cool, even as overcast as it used to be. But the rain, the kind of mood of the place, it appealed to me. And I love it here. I mean, this is my home. It's quite clear. And to me, it's one of those strange mysteries too. Why is Portland my home? It's more home than any place I've ever been. It's like you're saying, look in the mirror. It's not where I'm supposed to be. No place I've ever been is where I'm supposed to be. But I planned it here. It's like, yep, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Were you in Indiana or Oregon when you became sober?
I was in Oregon when I got sober.
And when you got to the higher power part of the 12 steps, how did you conceptualize that, and how did you relate to that aspect of it?
Better word is, how did I relate to it, as opposed to how did I conceptualize it? Because how I related to it is I didn't conceptualize it. So yes, but part of the story of part is I started meditating. I even joined the Zen Community of Oregon and was sober, and 9 months sober, not drinking and not much craving, but crazy. And Hogan Bays at Great Bow, I was training under him, and I'd spent some time in residency there as my wife and I were going through a separation and struggling. Blessedly, he says, look, the Zen stuff is great for you, but you need to talk to other alcoholics. You need to be with other people who know your experience. None of us here really knows what it's like to be an alcoholic, which is true, and I'm so appreciative. He says, you need to talk to other people who are going through this. And so I said, great, I'll go to AA because I'm suffering so much. So I started attending AA. It's very, very, very helpful for me. AA in Portland is going to sound differently than AA in Alabama, because there's not a lot of God talk, but there is higher power talk and there is God talk. But the thing that I saw the 12 steps, and I thought that's brilliant. And to this day, I believe it's brilliant. And if we get caught up on labels, the words, we're going to get caught up and we're not going to be able to move forward. So I held it an open hand. And I said, if they use the word God, they're just using the word God. It's like the Diamond Sutra. When they say God, there is no God. So we use the word God. And for me, I would say higher power. And if somebody says, how do you understand your higher power? I said, I don't understand my higher power. As soon as I conceptualize higher power, fits supposedly inside this head, it's no longer bigger than me. And I think that in all religious traditions, the strongest expression of the religious tradition is and it's certainly the root of Zen, is I don't know. I don't know. And I humbly live in communion and in relationship to something that is more powerful than me, that I sense, but I don't know. I can't conceptualize it.
What came first, the sobriety or the Zen practice? Was it sounds like
sobriety?
Sobriety. Yeah.
Sobriety, going into therapy, meditation, and then Zen, and then AA. So it all kicked off. And I mean, me quitting drinking was a surrender. It was letting go. It was like, all right, the way I've been doing this ain't working. I'm about to lose my wife, my kids, my family. I have no job. This isn't working. And it was a complete letting go and a complete openness to there must be some other way. And so I started looking for that way, and some of these old strains that I've already named started to reemerge, and it's like, oh, I can grab that thread that used to have so much power that I had completely lost track of.
What actually initiated the sobriety? What was there, an event, or was it just kind of a gradual realization? Were like you given an ultimatum, or what? Like,
it was my wife saying, I'm done. I'm leaving you. And I love my wife. We're still together. And it was a moment of clarity. Not only did I not want her, but I knew why she was leaving, because I was a train wreck. I was not somebody. If I knew this in the moment, I thought if she were my friend and she were married to this guy who was me, but I was her friend, I'd say, you should leave that guy. He's not doing you any good. And I could see that. And so I thought, if she's leaving, and I'm not just afraid of losing her, which I was, because I love her and she's my companion. And, but I also said, I'm not being the person I need to be for her. And I'm going to figure that out. And I'm not being the person, I was an okay father, but I'm not being the best father I could be. And I need to figure that out. So it was a moment of clarity that said, I need to turn my life around or I'm going to lose these things that I love. And it was a motivation that was based on my fear of losing them, but also it was a wholesome motivation. It was a motivation that says, I need to be better and I need to show up in a way that is good. So it was my wife basically saying she was going to leave. We went through a couple of years of real rough times as I was transforming, until she says, you're a different man. We have a wonderful, loving relationship now. It took a long time to get here.
So when your therapist suggested meditation, you thought like, aha, Zen, I know, like that's kind of what resonates with me. Did you go straight to the keep forgetting the name of the Hogan Bays?
Yeah, no, I didn't go straight there. I went straight to the internet. And I saw what was around, and I didn't know it was actually, at first I didn't know it was Zen, but I grabbed some books. I started reading a couple books. One was Theravada. I think the first book that I really read was Theravada, and some were generalist Buddhist books. But and this was not me to go out and be in community. I was what I would call a basement drunk, writing on my computer, not very many friends, not interested in community. But I made myself vulnerable, and I went to different small groups here. And the story is that I went to Dharma Heir, who also, they have the strongest presence in Portland, along with ZCO, Great Vow. ZCO is the name of the mother organization. Great Vow is the monastery. They have Heart of Wisdom Zen Temple here. And at the time, ZCO, Zen Community of Oregon, was renting space from Dharma Heir's temple. And I went to the temple thinking it was going to be Dharma Heir, and it was actually ZCO. And they said, oh, well, Dharma Heir's meeting in this other building where you can get meditation instruction. So I went over there, and they said, but come back next Thursday. We'd love to have you sit with us. And I felt so welcome and such a connection, and it felt like the right place, that I came back the next Thursday, and then I just stuck and hung out there.
And were you around 30-ish years old at this point?
Say that again.
Like, how old were you? Around 30 or so? 35? Trying
Oh,
to do the math in my head.
I was about 35.
Yeah.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
And what was your impression of the people, the rituals, the vibe, what? So you walk in the door and what hits you,
What hit me immediately and what was most helpful and what I try to bring to the Sangha that I lead now is a welcoming presence, is a friendly, welcoming presence, that it was an open door. And there's an invitation and a draw in. Hogan was the teacher who was coming from Great Vow, it's about an hour and a half away. Great Vow is about an hour and a half away from Portland, and he was the one who was coming down. So I didn't really know Chozen at all, but he was not distancing or aloof. He saw me and he wanted to work with me and he wanted to help me. And so it was immediate relationship with the teacher, and the community welcomed me in. There was no sense of barrier, you have to prove yourself, or even any of that competitiveness. It was just a welcoming and warm community. And there was a seriousness to the practice as well. And so there was a rigor that I appreciated. It's not, I could tell that the people there were serious about the practice, and they held it lightly at the same time. They weren't grim about the practice. They weren't trying to prove something about the practice. They were just trying to be good. And that might be a word that we catch on, but it's a helpful frame. It's that feeling I had back when I was a kid. I just want to be good. And I think that's the heart of all of us. I want to be good and caring for others and connect with all this. And that's what I saw in that community.
Did he have Dharma transmission at this point?
Yes.
And so did you start doing Dokusan with him pretty quickly?
And that it's semantics, but it was Sanzen.
Sanzen.
Yeah. And again, a lot of what I do is, I trained with Zisio and then I trained at Chiboji with Genjo. And so what I do now is drawn from both of those, primarily from Genjo, just continuing with that tradition. But he made Sanzen immediately available. And there's no sense that you have to pick me as your teacher. He says, if you're sitting in front of me, we have a student-teacher relationship. I'll work with you. And so it was welcoming and informal. And I started doing Sanzen right away, not koan study right away. That came later. But just coming in and basically saying, I'm a train wreck, help me. And he would give me advice and guidance.
Yeah. So what were the early practices? Were they breath work, counting the breaths?
Yes. There was breath work, there's listening meditation. So just listening, and body scans were the three, as they are, kind of three foundational practices to lead you or guide a person into Zazen.
And was there any talk about, putting the tension in the tanden, or any sort of kind of body work or anything?
No, I think it was helpful too. I think that for some people, putting that focus into the tanden or breathing a certain way is really helpful, but it was really sit with what you got and notice the breath. And wherever you're at with the breath, just let the breath be there. So there is a kind of a faith that if we sit and relax, the body will organize itself. And then at later times, as the body starts to organize, you might find, and I find this for myself as a teacher, is you might find certain, a person might have an affinity or a calling forth to bring more of an attention to the hara or other aspects of practice. But it was really, fundamentally just sit, be open.
And so you went and lived there for a little while at some point.
Just a little while, for a month.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then years later, my wife got involved, and we always had a close connection with the monastery. So she did it for a longer period than I did, but we'd go up every week for a day or two. And so we would kind of merge with the monastic community and then come home and keep our house and raise our kids and maintain our jobs. But we had a close connection with
so she started practicing too.
A year after I started practicing, I said, I think you'd really like this. And she kept, you do you, I'll do me. And she's a very sweet person, but we were butting heads in those days. And she said, no, I want to do my own thing. She's very autonomous and a force. And then one day I mentioned it again. I said, I think you'd really like it. And she said, if you were anyone other than my husband, I'd probably listen to you. And so I'm going to listen to you and just take you as a friend and go with you. And she fell in love with it right away, the practice.
And did she develop a teacher-student relationship with the teachers there?
Yes, likewise, she did as well. Yeah.
Does she still practice with them today?
She left about a year after I left. So she's always lagging behind a year. But she left ZCO about a year after I left and has not maintained a Zen practice.
So eventually you did koans with them, is that correct?
Correct.
Were you given mu?
Yes. The way that they at least at that time and with people who are not monastics or ordained, it was not a formalized koan curriculum. And so I have to pause because it would be, I'd be given a koan seemingly randomly and work with it for a while or a couple of months, and then give an expression that met Hogan's satisfaction or Chozen satisfaction, move on. But they also do what is called, so it's taking me a moment to recall these steps, but they do koan sesshin. So they hold like a sesshin a month at Great Vow, and each one has a different theme. And because they are what's it called? Yeah, it's white plum. So they do a mix of Rinzai and Soto, but they're primarily Soto, and pulling Rinzai in a little bit. So they would do koans with their monastics, but for the general community, they'd have koan sesshin, and at koan sesshin we'd be given the first sesshin I did. We were given mu to work with. And so I was given it then, and I later on every now and then a mood checking question, but it was kind of what felt to me based on what I was bringing forth and my relationship. It wasn't as structured and as thorough as later what I got with Genjo.
Was there any expectation that there would be a Kensho breakthrough with mu, or was it just one of many koans that you may have been assigned at the time?
I mean, there's always a hope that somebody's going to have a Kensho and a breakthrough, but no expectation.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is my orientation to koans to this day, is you work with a koan and it will move you forward. And it might be a koan that you have a breakthrough with. And it might be a koan that you have a deep insight with. And it might be a koan that shifts your practice or shifts your relationship to the world. And so there's never an expectation that this koan is going to do something. It's going to mix. It's going to have an influence upon somebody. I don't know that Hogan, Chozen, or even Genjo would speak to it this way, but that's how I orient to it. Is the koans move us forward, and some koans will get people to a breakthrough moment, and some of them will get them to a melting through moment. And sometimes they just move them on the way and add to the whole of practice that transforms us.
So eventually you left you left that community and went to work with Genjo. What precipitated that?
There's a period of time when I just did not know. I couldn't find an anchor point in the community, and it felt like my work with the teachers, well, I wouldn't say complete, felt no longer vital to me. That there was some flavor, that there was something that my own life, my own karma, these threads that we're talking about here was blossoming and saying, I need a different mirror, I need a different reflection, I need something else that's going to challenge me in different ways. I remember saying, it's interesting, Hogan and Chozen gave me the name Rinzan, same kanji, but pronounced san. And I said, I know how to do Rinzan. I know how to do the motions here, and I wasn't feeling challenged, and I would try to draw the teachers and they would try to challenge me, but it just didn't have energy anymore. Sat with it for a while. I don't think one should leave a community casually. And I really sat with it for a couple of years, wondering, what am I doing here? And then one intense year. And I remember being at a meeting of senior students, and the bubble popped, and I made an announcement, I'm going to leave.
And you were pretty enmeshed in the community. I mean, you were on the board of directors and so forth.
Right. Correct. Yeah, I was a senior student. I was board of directors. I was ordained. If you're not ordained, you could still lead a Zazen Kai. I was doing different things like that. I had formed a 12-step Buddhist group. Yeah, so I was very, very, very much involved. I mean, people like knew me, and for many, it was a shock that I was leaving because I was there just all the time. But it was a moment of clarity where it's just like, I need to move on. I said, I don't know where I'm going, but I need to find, there's something calling me out there, and I don't know what it is. And let Hogan and Chozen know, and they accepted and encouraged me to continue on my path, this way-seeking mind, finding its way. And I remember again going to the internet and seeing what was available. I said, I'm just going to do retreat with some other group. There's another group I was attracted to. And I had two friends who had said that they had done sesshin with Genjo. And they said, oh, he's great. You'd love him. That was about it. And it's like, oh, he's great. You'd love him. You'd like him. And I said, oh, there's that Genjo guy and Chiboji. And oh, they have a sesshin at a time that would work for me.
Is that
and
Seattle,
so,
if I remember?
Seattle, which is about 3 hours from here. Well, it used to be 3 hours. Now it's 4.5 because traffic gets worse and worse. But at the time, it was still 3 hours just 10 years ago. And so just sight unseen, much like me moving to Portland, I didn't listen to any of his teisho. I didn't even know who he was. I just knew that these two friends had said that. And I wrote to him and said, I'm a friend of this other person who recommended. I trained at ZCO. Can I come up for sesshin? And he said, oh, yeah, sure. Come on up. And so I went up and did sesshin. And my heart burst open. I mean, I found the teacher, the place that was the perfect mirror, the perfect reflection for me at that time. And I remember being very touched by Genjo's everydayness, just his ordinariness, and an even deeper relaxation of, this is just the way things are, and this is the way it is, and let's just join in practice and celebrate this practice and celebrate our life, and just the sense that it's all okay. It's all okay. We have these egos and they cause problems, and that's okay. We just got to work with them. And there was such that invitation, and I felt such a chemistry and an appreciation of him. I went through that first session. He thought I was already ordained. He said, go ahead and get your robes on. And then he saw I didn't have robes. He says, are you not ordained? And I said, no. And I said, he says, why aren't you ordained? I said, well, to ordain with my previous community, with ZCO, I'd have to live at the monastery, which means I'd have to give up my wife and my kids and my job. I was a psychotherapist at the time. So I had people I was caring for. And to me, that's what's most important, is caring for other people. So I'd have to stop that in order to put on robes. And that seemed weird and not really helpful given my life. If I wasn't caring for people, going to a monastery might have made more sense. But I said, yeah, I'm not gonna give up any of those other vows or how I care for other people. And of course, for Genjo, that's the same orientation. He says, oh, well, okay, well, so you're not ordained, but I see you as a monk and a serious practitioner. So welcome to Chipoji. And we did a week of koan study. He gave me the preliminary. He saw that I already had a breakthrough. He says, so let's move through Mu. And he gave me a bunch of checking questions that I passed, and we finished the week. And I was like, great. And he says, well, nice knowing you, and hope to meet you sometime. But off I went, no expectations. And I thought I would continue roaming and checking different teachers, but I was like, there was something there. And so I the next session, which was 3 months later, I went back, and he welcomed me back and asked how things. At the first session, I was still kind of a ZCO. So he says, how are things at ZCO? And I said, well, I've left that community to just see where else. And at that moment, he said, if you train with me, go ahead. So
you did the session and then you left.
Correct.
So that probably planted the seed at some level then.
It's in all honesty, when I investigate that, it didn't plant the seed, it fertilized the seed.
Okay.
Because I was already like, I'm leaving. And just to go sesshin somewhere else was, I have one foot out the door. I'm actually out the door, but I haven't closed the door yet. That's probably the best metaphor. I'm out the door, but I haven't closed the door yet. And after that sesshin, it did say, yep, time to move on. But even then, when I wrote the letter to them, I wasn't saying I'm going to go to Chiboji or something like that. But it was just like, there's things out here there's more in the Dharma world that I want to experience. But I went back to Genjo then, and he says, well, you've left CCO. If you want to train here, you're welcome to train under me. And if you want to train under me, I want to talk to you about ordination, because I think you're a priest. And I think been a priest for a while, and you just haven't had robes on. And that was a difficult session. But during that session, I decided I'm going to put on robes, and it was a different frame. He says, you will live your life, but you'll live a life in robes. And that worked for me, and that I found that compelling, which is now the way that two people that I've ordained is the same thing. You will train, and your primary commitment is to this training and to the practice, but you will live your life, the same life, but you're going to live it in robes.
When you say that, do you mean metaphorically, or do you
mostly metaphorically?
Okay.
Mostly metaphorically. I'm not talking about the clothing. I wear these clothes all the time. For certain reasons. I don't require it of my own swing. Genjo didn't require it of me. I wear them all the time because I'm a religious man and I live a religious life. And so I wear my religious garments all the time.
So if you go to the supermarket, you wear your garments.
Yeah. And people say, so what martial art do you practice? And I say, just sitting.
It's funny. One time I was coming back from a local sitting group, and I was, I wear kind of like samugi, type of outfit when I go to the Zen Center. And I stopped I hadn't had dinner yet, so I stopped at Taco Bell on the way home. And I remember I thought like, oh, they're gonna think I'm coming back from karate or something.
Yeah.
And I pulled up and the guy says, "Are you a priest?" I'm like, well, technically, yes. And he's like, it was just really interesting how he like immediately went to priest instead of karate or something. Like, I think like something in him, like he seemed really drawn to it. It was really kind of interesting.
And that's one of the reasons I wear it. I checked out with people. I said, do I wear it? Am I going to seem arrogant or putting on airs? And some people read it that way. But most people said, if you wear it, I think it'll be helpful. And they say, I find it inspiring when I see somebody wearing robes or wearing religious garments. I find it comforting, inspiring. And if we think about Shakyamuni's very story, is that what inspired him to practice is he saw a renunciant and he was inspired. And I think that's part of the role of a priest. I mean, I don't think it is to inspire, to encourage. And so through my clothes, I encourage, and sure, it's the same thing. I mean, I jokingly say people wonder what martial art, but many people, I remember being on a plane and I sat next to a woman and she started a conversation and she said, so I was going somewhere to do a session. And she goes, I was wondering if you were a priest. And we had this delightful conversation about Buddhism and practice and spirituality, which is a balm to people in these difficult times. So that's why I wear it. And that's what I ask. I don't ask others wear it, but I say, this is what we're doing as priests in the world. We're being of service. We're pointing to something beyond this everyday world of materialism and suffering and dukkha, that there's a different way to be in the
world. Could you talk a little bit about like what your training with Genjo was like? So he didn't make you kind of, so he pushed you through move pretty easily, and then so you dived into the Koan curriculum.
We moved through all the Koan curriculum, which was the Monkan, preliminary koans, the Momonkan, the Hekigan Roku, the Rinzai Roku, Tozan's 5 ranks, then the precepts. And
so you guys do the grasping vines, or I forget what it's called.
Genjo and I are flipping through that right now. That's an appendix. It's not part of the curriculum, but the entangling vines. But because we've gone through all the other koans, this is what we're playing with now when I go up and do sesshin with him.
And then there's a lot of duplicates in that, if I remember looking through it. Right.
They're duplicates, but they're presented just slightly differently. So sometimes the duplicates can be interesting. There's in fact, and I'm not going to be able to recite it, but if you look up Mu and entangling vines, the exchange goes further and it dilutes it in my mind. There's a further exchange, and I was like, I think I like it. I like the simplicity of the Momonkan.
Yeah. So how long from the point of that first session? So your practice was mostly just moving through the Koan curriculum, is that right?
Well, the practice was to show up when I was called to come forth, and what he requires and this is what I carry on with my own students. What he requires is 4 session. You come to every session, and they hold 4 session a year. And so I was required to come to 4 session. If I failed to come to a session, I would take off my robes. I mean, that is essential. And I agree with that. Not doing session, you're not really getting steeped in the practice. And so I would come to session, moving through all of the posts. So I knew the posts intimately. And I would come up for an occasional Zazen Kai and other kinds of trainings or events that they had at Chiboji. He and I would have exchanges, email, but as well as Zoom exchanges. I pretty much shortly after ordaining, I opened up No Rank Zendo here just as a sitting group. I wasn't a teacher, but I was the priest holding a sitting group, and he would come down and we'd have Zazen Kai here. So, I mean, truth, even though I wasn't ordained at Great Vow, I mean, there's 3 things. One is Great Vow trained me really well. They're a great model for honing training skills and high expectations with regard to that. And I greatly appreciate the time that the sessions I did and what have you. Plus, I think that I just have a temperament that is geared towards ritual and seriousness and the kind of presence that the training provides, that I settle into it very comfortably, and it feels quite naturally, and I feel quite at home in it. So in his own words, he says that I'm not needing to do a lot of training. I'm already really well trained. I just needed to learn this tradition that he was transmitting, sharing with me, and tighten some things up and deepen my practice, in terms of the koan curriculum. I'm not trying to suggest in any way that he was saying, "Oh, wow, you got it all put together," but he was saying the foundations are there.
So it sounds like you'd had an awakening experience prior to working with him. What do you think the relationship was to that opening and your subsequent koan work? How did they fit together? What was the relationship? What was the dynamic?
Any awakening, any breakthrough is a breakthrough from one facet into the great mystery. And so I mean, no breakthrough clarifies everything completely, but it opens up a passageway. And so any breakthrough and multiple breakthroughs in different sizes are going to start to open us to the mystery, this great it, this whatever it is. We call it Buddha, we call it God, or whatever. So each of them is going to give a different facet. And I had several breakthroughs, one very big breakthrough. And what it helps with koan study is that when you recognize a similar taste, then you go, oh, that's that. And yet no koan is exactly hitting the same spot. It would be boring. We wouldn't need to do more than mu. They ask us to mature and to see it from different facets. So it starts to clear a path. It's still, if the koans aren't confounding you at some level, then they're useless. And so our mind gets involved, or it's a different angle that I'm not quite expecting. And so you have to lean into it. Some of them come more quickly because of previous work, but they're still asking something different. And again, koan can provide access into breakthrough, but koan is out, I think, even more deeply asking us to be flexible and to learn how to juggle and not get caught in any one place. If somebody comes to a koan with a shout or a mu in response to every koan, those are great responses sometimes, but after a while, it's just like, give me something different. They go, well, then I'll give you this one. It's like, how flexible are you? Can you give me something completely brand new? And that's forever. Can you give me something I've never seen before? And that's forever.
In the teaching you do now, do you start people off with mu?
Start people off with preliminary koans. And so there's 5 preliminary koans that Genjo has given me. They're just basic koans that actually they're brilliant. Each of these 5 basic koans, they access a different facet of the great mystery from different ways. So they, and actually you'll see these facets in all the other koans. So they're just a great introduction, as well as they teach how to work with koans, because the first koan is bring me the temple bell. And, somebody, comes forward and said, I brought you this. I'm not hearing a bell. You start to lean into, how to work with it and what the expectations are. So the strange language and dance of koan work gets introduced. Then after those 5, going into the mumonkan and mu, and then checking questions with mu, and then either the second koan or then moving into the sound of one hand. We take a detour from the mumonkan briefly to examine the sound of one hand, and then we just plow on through the mumonkan.
What are your expectations with a student with mu? Do you want them to have an actual opening, or what is?
I'm expecting I'm not expecting their head to blow off. That's just not realistic given given the lives that we live. I suppose if you think about the stories around that and what the expectations are, is that people lived in monasteries. And so they had continual support around them, continual training around them, and they had nowhere else to go. It wasn't like they could say, I'm going to leave the monastery and work at Walmart. I mean, we're talking about ancient times, is that there was a compression that might support working with mu until your head blew off. I don't know that that's necessary or even beneficial, but it's not going to work. It's not going to be helpful in a lay setting. And so, and at the same time, I would say that any koan, mu in particular, certainly in the context of sesshin after sesshin, if you work mu several sesshin, but even if you're carrying mu around your daily life, it will deepen you and it will open you. And so what I'm looking at is more intimacy with mu and a confidence with that intimacy with what mu points at with mu. So does one have intimacy, openness, and an increased confidence with it so that we can move on and continue to open and to continue to increase our intimacy with this mystery.
And like, how do you conceptualize awakening? Is, some people will say it's because I'm kind of on dangerous ground here, but like,
you are.
But I mean, in talking to a lot of people in these interviews and talking to people formally and talking to teachers over the years, I've kind of started to get a sense that there's some people who see Zen kind of working, I don't want to say on a psychological level, but it's mostly about perception, and like the perspective, it's how you are, what's your relationship to reality? What's your relationship to, phenomena?
That would be one facet in my mind.
What are you, right? So where other people I've interacted with, there's this is really hard for me to explain, but there's a source, right? Some people could call it God. Some people could call it, the Dharmakaya, right? Mm-hmm. And in those threads, it seems like the expectation is that you become intimate, or, that there's intimacy with that. I mean, can you talk to this at all? What your relationship, like how you see practice, and I realize at some levels the false dichotomy.
Correct.
But
so we can acknowledge that, then we can talk about it.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. These are different facets. These are different facets of practice. They're all true in our great reality. That I need to get past, and using your 2 examples, and there's many other different facets, is I need to get past my own perceptual thinking, my projections, my congested mind state, and that's a big part of maturity, and it's a big part of what I do as a psychotherapist, is help people see past their limitations and their barriers. That will facilitate seeing into what one might call source or mu, or God, from different traditions. In my tradition, we often just call it mu, or the ineffable it. Genjo has a line which I appreciate, which is the intimate infinite. I love that. So that's one facet of practice, and some people are going to be more at that place. And there's other people who I work with who, they're just diving right in, and that's where they're at. And now they're going to need to learn these other facets. And this person is going to lean into these other facets, but it's awakening. It's awakening, and we're forever awakening. There's no moment when we're like, I'm completely awake. maybe a moment when we're completely awake, but we fall back asleep again. So it's a continual process of knowing all the facets and moving around all the different facets and knowing it more and more intimately and deeply, and it's bottomless. And so as soon as this is why you knew that you're on treacherous ground, because as soon as we say I have a conceptualization of awakening, it's limited. So I've limited it to some kind of experience. And so most deeply, how I orient towards awakening is it's the same thing as I said about higher power. We just use this word because it's helpful, but we're going to be awakening for the rest of our lives. And so I don't have expectations on what that looks like, but I can get a sense of whether my students are waking up more, whether they're clearer, whether they're kinder, whether they're more open, whether they're more in touch. And, is this stuff happening? And inevitably it does. I don't have to do anything. They just need to show up. They need to show up and sit and investigate and be earnest. And the practice and the forms take care of itself. And I just need to be responsive to what's in front of me. And it works quite beautifully.
So, sorry. Sorry about that. So you're practicing with Genjo, going to, having, attending sesshin. At some point, I assume you finished the Koan curriculum. Was there talk of you being a teacher? Like how was that broached?
How it's the
Were
way
you kind of made an assistant teacher first, or did you get Inca first and then there's talk of being a teacher? Like, what was the sequence of transition from practitioner to teacher?
So fundamentally is that we don't, Genjo and I use the language, and again, it's because it's language of teacher, student, but it's not, oh, you're a teacher now, you become a teacher. There's nothing to teach, it's out. And what we do more is train, what we do more is invite, what we do more is point, what we do more is encourage. And so the term teacher, we're cautious around it. And there was a certain point, I was first an unsui, I'm always an unsui, a cloud and water person. And so forever learning, but I was a novice priest. And then at a certain point after I had finished the training posts, I became an Osho, which was a full priest. And when I became Osho, he also, this is non-traditional, but he sensed it was okay for me to do it. He gave me permission to start doing, I was doing Dharma interview with people talking. I mean, I'm a seasoned psychotherapist. I'd done 12-step work. I'd sponsored people. It's like, you've got some, I wasn't coming at this brand new. I know how to work with people. And so I was doing informal Dharma interviews, but when I became an Osho, I could start, it's still called Dharma interview, but I started doing koan training with people. I started introducing them with koans. And so you could say at that point, I became a teacher. And he knew, obviously I'm running No Rank Zendo and it was thriving and more people were coming. It's not until Inca, and Inca is granted after completing the koan curriculum and then one more year, just to make sure that I'm not falling off the wagon or letting something get to my head. And then Inca is given, and it's basically Inca is just saying, you've learned what I have to teach you and or to train you, you're fully trained and you can carry this tradition on in a way that you see most fit. And I think that he saw in me somebody who respected the tradition and did not do make radical changes, that honored it, respected it, but was also thoughtful about in terms of which changes I'd make. So it's at that point that we formally call it Dokusan and Teisho. I was giving Dharma talks, but now we called it Teisho, and it has more bells and whistles on it, so to speak. So it was, in a way, it was kind of a slow transition, which not a formal, you are a teacher. There were formal ceremonies. For now, you're a full priest, you're an Osho, and a very formal ceremony for the transmission or Inka, being made a Dharma Heir and fully brought into the lineage. Those are formal, but as Genjo says, that's acknowledging something that's already happened, and now we're just celebrating it.
How does the Inca ceremony work in your tradition? So it sounds like it's a public ceremony.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And I'm not a party guy, but I had to. It fell upon me to organize it. We held it down here at No Rank because this is where I'm training people. This is where my sangha was, which I thought was quite sweet. Rather than holding it up at Chiboji, came down here, and yeah, it's a big ceremony where I come in dressed in beggar's robes, my most casual robes, even though I'd already had brown robes at that point, and carrying my hat, and I enter into the Zendo, and then I do Dharma battle with several people who present me with koans, who won't let me pass these 4 gates until finally coming up to Genjo, who presents me with the final koan, and I have to pass it with him, and then he'll hand me a staff. But and then there's a big banquet afterwards, and invitations and gifts on all the chairs, and I had to organize all that. So it's different than Soto, where it happens in the middle of the night and suddenly somebody walks out and they're wearing a different
Right.
Kesa.
Uh-huh.
It's really brought forward, and both of those raise different things. I mean, I'm fundamentally shy, and I don't like being the center of attention, and it challenges me to be the center of attention. I'd rather not, and to move through these things humbly and recognizing each stage, each step, we're becoming more and more of service and less about us. I mean, that's what became clear to me in each of these ceremonies from Jukai on. Jukai is not about me. It's about being more of service to others, and on into Inka, which is now I'm really of service to others and of service to this tradition and this lineage. And it's not about me. And that's wonderful to move through those stages.
So could you talk a little bit about what your relationship are to the precepts and how you work on them with your students? It seems like in a lot of Rinzai places, the precepts are not really emphasized at all, and maybe that's not a fair statement. But I've talked to a few people who've been ordained in, very traditional Rinzai contexts, and I asked, did you do any work with the precepts before getting ordained? And they said no, and so I don't know how normative that is, but I'd like to hear how your tradition works with the precepts, and what the touch points are and how you work with them and so forth.
Both communities that I came from are precept heavy. Both communities that I came from had Dharma fathers, Maizumi and Edo, who violated the precepts and harmed other people. And so in both communities, there was a strong awareness that the precepts need to be acknowledged, practiced, and emphasized. And so I completely agree with that, and completely agree. And indeed, the heart of our practice is caring for other people. And if somebody is harmed in the practice, you really have to question the practice. And so the caring for people comes first, and the practice comes second. And that is always true, not in terms of babying or coddling people. I mean, people need to be challenged, and we have more capacity than we realize. And yet, harming others or getting caught in our own ego and our own wants and what have you, in the name of practice, watch out. And so, that's a kind of message that I'm continually putting forth in the song. I let everyone know this is not a practice of burying your head in the sand and just getting peace for yourself. It's of service to others. And the foundation for that service are the precepts. And when lost or confused, go back to the precepts. Are you living the precepts? You're less likely to stay lost and confused if you're living the precepts. If you're breaking the precepts and you keep breaking them, you're going to cause harm and get lost and confused. So there's my my spiel on the precepts and my orientation. And before anyone receives Jukai, they do precept study with me. And about once a year, we'll have a discussion group where we haven't done it in a little while, I think since COVID hit. We're in person again, but we were all on Zoom. We did do it one while we were on Zoom. We'll have a discussion circle where we'll bring out a precept a week and talk about it. And I tell people, take this precept with you out into the world and walk with it as a mindfulness task. I will honor all life. I will not kill. Carry that around with you. Pay attention. Let it transform you, just like a koan. They serve as a koan differently than what I'm describing here in the koan curriculum, but it is. Let this, just like we let a koan transform us, let the precept transform you. Be very aware of it. Be very mindful. And so that's what I ask of the students. And so I'm very heavy in terms of these as guidelines for being good and caring for others.
And you mentioned the koan steps earlier, but I can't remember. Do you guys work on the precepts again as part of kind of advanced koan practice?
That's how we close.
Yeah, and And at that point, are you working on them from a non-dualistic perspective, or like how is that, or is it
Every
kind of separate?
koan,
You can
every
talk about
koan, every koan that you work on, well, I'll say this. Well, every koan that you work on, you're working on it from different perspectives.
it. Mhm.
If you say every koan is a non-dualistic koan, you're going to get stuck. We don't want to be stuck in what we call non-dualistic. It's a concept. We also don't want to be stuck in that. So the beauty of koans is they ask us to juggle the relative, the transcendent, or the relative, the absolute, and the transcendent. That there's a duality and a non-duality. And there's something beyond duality and non-duality. Is that more non-duality? No, we're talking non-duality then. Can't frame this, can't square it anymore. So, in answer to your question, yes, and more. That's how I would answer that.
Okay. And so I'm curious. So you mentioned Maizumi and Edo. It obviously, as you write the history of Zen in America, a big part of it has been teachers who victimize their students, usually often sexually, but also I think with some power tripping.
Yeah.
And what do you think the relationship is between, awakening? So the Buddha, Buddha means awakened one, Bodhi means awakened. So I mean, like, awakening is the kind of the core of the tradition. What is the relationship between awakening, um, ethical behavior, and psychological maturity? If we could put them in three different categories, what and psychological maturity might be, you know, you know, patterns that I developed in childhood that are not, serving me well.
Right.
Maybe not being controlled by them as much as, to kind of define it in those terms. Like how do those three work together? And like, are they totally different realms? Do they just influence each
Oh,
other kind of indirectly? Why are some teachers clearly awake enough to be made teachers, yet they're clearly lacking in in areas of ethics and psychological maturity? Like what like kind of give us a grand unified theory here. You have 5 minutes.
in 5 minutes.
I'm just kidding.
I might be able to.
Okay.
These are, as I've been saying, continue with this metaphor of facets,
Mhm.
that there are different facets of the great mystery.
Mhm.
And one facet may blow open and somebody sees very deeply. And that can be rewarded when it is really clear that a person sees really deeply from that perspective. It's like a jazz musician who's a phenomenal jazz musician and a misogynist and an addict.
Mhm.
And it's like, they're a phenomenal jazz musician. I happen to be watching a movie about that right now called Around Midnight. Phenomenal jazz musician, but he's an addict. And so everyone just adores the strength and kind of ignores the failings.
Mhm.
And so that can happen in spiritual practice too. There's a blowing open, and Edo and Maizumi were deep. I never practiced under either, but you know it from their students, and you know it from their writings. Is that there's just something so blown open there, but the other facets haven't been explored and excavated. And so that's the problem. Are they distinct? No, they overlap. But one way to think about it is that they're different facets. And some people can have profound psychological maturity, but not have a connection with the mystery. And they could be, in all honesty, that's my point, is that if you're happy and you're not harming other people, be with another facet you want. You don't need to blow open to the absolute if you're living a good life and caring for others. That's wonderful. There's, it's not necessary to do that. And yet for many people, there's a hunger to become more intimate with all aspects. And each of these aspects fundamentally, really fundamentally feed each other. Like in my experience, people can clear out their psychological well-being, but there's still a taint of dissatisfaction. But what is it to be truly free now? And they need to open up this other facet. So deep psychological work, if one wants to continue with it, will eventually open up to this other facet as well. And then the ethics also just starts to open up as well, because it just from as these other two open up, then we just have this natural desire to care for others. It just rises up naturally. And somebody could be extremely ethical, but not even know why they're being ethical and not have much development in these other areas. So it's a matter of developing all areas. And again, I think that the training and the koan curriculum does a wonderful job of that. And there's other resources out there for developing. Obviously, I'm an advocate for psychotherapy, and I think that nobody can do Zen and fully be a full human being. They have to do other things as well, and nobody can do psychotherapy alone and become fully free. That we need to rely upon these other resources.
Yeah. When you mentioned, someone can be, you know, psychologically mature, but kind of still have a sense of lacking. It kind of makes me think, if you look back at, the Buddha's path, his kind of great doubt was existential, getting older, getting sick and dying. That's kind of what drove him to practice. And it seems like, and maybe this is not fair to say, but it really seems like to really resolve those existential issues, you kind of need to see what the reality of the self is. It seems like there's just no, and it doesn't necessarily have to. I don't think it has to be a great, you know, singular blowout. I think it can be a little more gradual, but
Yeah.
but I think you need to resolve the question of the self, or you're just not going to get that peace. Do you disagree, or?
No, you will get I fundamentally agree with what you're saying, that I have found that, to really be at peace, I wouldn't say resolve, but to be at peace with, because it's never resolved, but to be at peace, then we need to see through it and have this one facet of the non-dual or the absolute mu, see into mu, and to know it and to be intimate with it creates a big wellspring of peace, and it balances that off. And I do agree with that psychological maturity only goes so far. The only area where I disagree is for some people there's just not a lot of traction or interest, and they might die happily. They might die with peace, and it's not because either it's just in their DNA or their karma or what have you. But I'm never one to say you need to see this. You need to see this facet. For some of us, we're drawn to it more. And for some people, they're stuck in such a way that I would say you're stuck, so you need to see it. But if somebody is happy and content and not harming others, hands off. I don't care if you can pass mu or not, and they have no end. It's just like, so I don't hold any position that one needs to see that. I would hold a position more that somebody has to be ethical and psychologically mature, because that's how we interact as human beings. This facet I have found helps us do that better and better and better, and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. But if it's happening, hands off. So it's a nuanced, if you saw on my face, I agree with you. And that's mostly my experience with people, but I wouldn't hold that to be an absolute.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about what you see as kind of the lay priest dichotomy or lack of thereof? Like, for example, I'm a priest, right? I got ordained, but I feel like a layman. Like I don't feel, I feel like a lay priest, like I don't. But if you look at kind of like the Buddhist organizations in America, there's the Lay Buddhist Association, then there's the Soto Buddhist Association. They just take priests, and I'm curious what you've talked a little bit about what you see as the life of a priest, but like, what does it mean to be a lay person, and what does it mean to be a priest? Would you give Inka to someone who's not been ordained, for example? What do you see the role of all these different categories and labels and so forth?
Say today I wouldn't do that. It just doesn't serve the function of giving Inka to somebody who's not. But I know other traditions do, and we're trying to figure this out. In the West, we don't. It's different, and we have Western forms of what is a priest and what's a pastor, and so we're figuring this out. And every community is doing it slightly differently. So the way I orient, say it doesn't have a historical precedent, or that's not the way it's done elsewhere. But yeah, nobody's doing it the way it's done elsewhere, because we're not in Japan, we're not in China, and it's not the 12th century, and that's what we're founded on. A lay priest is an oxymoron, really. Those are actually two contradictory words. And I think a lay practitioner is somebody, a lay practitioner, you have a priest and you have a renunciant. And a renunciant is somebody who's decided to live in a monastery, and they may ordain or they may be lay. but they've decided to renounce everyday life. I have a home, I have a wife, I have an insurance policy, I have an income, I have a car, I go grocery shopping, I live the life that anybody else does. And so I'm not a renunciant. In fact, I have nice things. And so I'm not a renunciant. There are fundamentally, I've renounced things, I've renounced aspects, but I don't live the life of a renunciant who lives a life of poverty or simplicity. I watch movies, I eat pizza. These are the things that I do. I've got an exercise bike over there. And I say, all right. But a priest is somebody who says, I'm going to share this practice and I'm going to be a spiritual resource and a cornerstone for people who want to engage a spiritual life. So I stand out as somebody who I serve a role that is going to help facilitate anybody in any way access spiritual life. And by that, we would say this primarily this facet that opens us up into the great mystery, as well as ethical and character issues, but mostly there, just as a therapist, I'm there primarily as somebody helping with their psychology, although we'll touch these other aspects. So that's what the priest does. Now, the renunciant is renouncing because it's a sign of personal practice, and this is going to help them in their practice, and it might be a model for other people in the world. The priest is somebody who may be a renunciant or not, but they are saying, I am somebody who is going to carry these vows and live this life all the time. I'm not going to leave my practice on weekends. It's one of the reasons I dress also, is because this isn't a weekend hobby. This is my life, and I'm going to be a model for that, of how to live a spiritual religious life in this difficult world, not a materialist reductionist world, but a world that is full of mystery. And is that going to be a resource? So that's what a priest is. And then as a priest, you perform rituals and you hold other things that a priest or a pastor does in the Western world. So that's what a priest does. And then a lay practitioner is somebody who is engaged in the practice and deeply involved in the practice, may receive jukai, which says they're going to live these ethical vows, and they're deeply, deeply engaged in it. And they're bringing that practice to other facets of the world. Not a priest primarily saying, here's the training, this is what I have to offer. Renunciant is saying, here's a different kind of training. And a lay practitioner saying, I take it to my job as a travel agent, and I just live this life, and that's a benefit to the world as well. But there's no expectations that they're going to share it in the same way that a priest does, which is more explicitly. That's how I would formulate those three.
You'd mentioned earlier, with your training with Genjo, there's an absolute requirement that you attend the sessions, to the point where if you miss one, that's it. You're not a student of his anymore.
I mean, I could miss one if it were an emergency.
Yeah.
My wife had breast cancer, and she was undergoing chemotherapy, and she gave me the okay. She was fine, and she had other resources, and I went up to session, and I got there, and Genjo was like, I'm surprised you came. I mean, hands at home, and it's like, we're okay, and it was, I got full permission, and I'm still very caring for her, but it was that important to me. But yeah, if you miss one, it's just a signal. If you can't attend session, it's not a punishment. But I mean, if we're not doing session, in my mind, is we're not tasting the deepest waters. It takes that practice, and that's really the practice that in my tradition the priest is bringing forward. But it's also, to me, it's a sign if you're not holding the session, it's just not the right role for you. And if somebody says, I can't make session because my job is coming up or something, it's not the right time to be a priest. And I'd say, let's set the robes aside until it's the right time, or maybe you're going to manifest in a different way.
I'm a huge fan of session, so I'm kind of asking this a little bit as a,
okay.
But why? Like, what do you see as what is the role of session? Why is it important?
I mean, session is why is Zazen important? Zazen is important because we set everything else aside, and we squeeze ourselves into a form for a half hour, an hour, 2 hours a day. But for a period of time, we squeeze ourselves into a rigorous form that we're not going to escape from. And the form shapes us and hones us. And in the process of being in relationship with this form, we will go deeper. We will see beyond our everyday mind. Session is just more of that. And the daily practice is essential, but we have to dive into this depth of session. And as a fan of session, you know that it's different. And I don't say if you're doing Zen, you have to do session. If you're going to be a priest, you have to do session. But if you're doing Zen, you don't have to do session. But I do say you will open up in ways that you won't open up by just having a daily practice. And that's because of the form, the rigor, the exhaustion. I mean, our practice is in large part exhaust yourself in this. And it takes more than an hour or two to exhaust yourself.
It's funny. I don't know if funny is, I guess it's not funny, but I was reading a paper on, they were looking at, um, you know, senior or, long-term meditators.
Mhm.
And I think they were actually like Vipassana or something, not Zen people, but, and they could actually look at the digital images of their brain activity, captured in a moment of time, and what was going on with the different networks and stuff. And they could actually be like, that person is a long-term meditator, that person's not, just by their brain imaging. It's pretty fascinating. But here's what's interesting, or most interesting to me at least, is the characteristics of a long-term practitioner correlated less to years practicing versus how many days they've been in retreat. So I thought that was,
That's a good advertisement.
Yeah, yeah, and I know for myself, a day of sesshin is probably worth like a year of just regular daily sitting. I mean, they're both important to me in different ways, but as far as kind of moving the needle, it's all about the sesshin for me.
And what I find is the people, I'm so proud of my Sangha right now. It's this No Rank Zendo Sangha. It's a sesshin heavy Sangha. I mean, when we hold sesshin, it's almost like the whole Sangha just comes to sesshin. Everyone does. I mean, almost everyone does. But there's just a strong core group. And what people get when you do it, you feel it. And I don't know of anyone who doesn't complete a session and go, wow, that was great, I need to do another. And I say, sign up now. Because in 3 months, you're going to think better of it. You're going to say, maybe not right now because it's intense. But when you go through it, and so, yeah, and I find the people who stay with Zen, who really stay with it, are the people who are doing sesshin. I'm not saying that's an absolute, but that's a trend. And I think that's a trend to acknowledge also, because it's kind of like the bread and butter of it. That's where we really taste something that this is pointing at with a clarity that could happen at any time. It could happen at any time, but that's why we do these forums, because it facilitates it.
Is it for you guys? Is it 100% in person, or do you offer an online option?
I followed the protocol of others and teachers who during the pandemic would hold retreat but not call it sesshin, because it's not quite the same. So during the pandemic, I had Zoom retreat, which was basically the schedule of sesshin on Zoom, and I would do interview and what have you. And it was good. I'm glad we had it, because we were shut down for about a year. So we did 3 or 4 of them online, and it helped the thread to stay alive. But now that we're back in person, I don't have Zoom on at all. People have asked, and I just like, it's to me, it kind of pulls away from that gathering. I'm not opposed to Zoom. I think there's great uses for it, but I'm keeping it out of sesshin.
How about Sanzen? Will you do Zoom Sanzen with people?
I do. So now we're going to switch back to Dokusan. Instead of, they're the same thing, but the traditions call them differently. Okay. I have some.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Could you differentiate what you mean by Dokusan and Sanzen then?
It's just a difference of word, really, I think. Okay. The Soto tradition that I came from called it Sanzen. And I just nitpicked on that a little bit earlier when I said Hogan and Chozen, they call it Sanzen. And so that's what it's called in their community, and in the Rinzai community with Genjo, we call it Dokusan, but it's the same thing. If there's differences, it's so esoteric, I don't know it. It's just a name. It's like, what's the difference between Dharma talk and a Teisho? It just has a different name, and our post holders even have different names. Oh, your Enji is our Jisha, and your Eno is our Densu. So it's okay. But I do it with select people, like I do with Mutoku, who's out in New York, and so he and I will meet, do a quick exchange. And I find it, as Genjo said in your interview with him, I thought, nope. Would I say it's as good? No. Would I say it can still be helpful and still move the line forward? Yep. And so I'm willing to do it for people who want to train under me and have proven a commitment and have a regular practice and are deep practitioners. I'm like, yep, we can do that.
Cool. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we kind of wrap up?
Nope, I think I covered it all.
Okay. All right. Great. So if somebody wanted to kind of connect with you, what would be the best forum for that?
Visit my website at www.norankzendo.org. So come check out norankzendo.org. That's based on Rinzai's true person of no rank. And that would be all the entry gates are there where we sit. Even before the pandemic, I'd formed Cloud Zendo, where we sat every morning here and in my room, but we would open up our Zoom thing so we could sit together and before the day started. So we have Cloud Zendo. So if people want to sit with us, they can sit in Cloud Zendo, and Cloud Zendo feeds into our regular evening sits. So people who are not in Portland can come and listen to Tay Show and sit with the community on the screen. But otherwise, my email address there. But yeah, norankzendo.org.
And your psychotherapy, do you work with muggles, or is it mostly people involved with Zen? And muggles is a Harry Potter word. So
I have worked with people who are interested in Zen and who are Zen practitioners, but the majority is just people who want psychotherapeutic help. I'm non-discriminating, and most people appreciate that I'm a Zen practitioner, and appreciate that I go off to sesshin. Sometimes I come back from sesshin and I can be brutal in terms of psychotherapy, and I have to check that. But no, it's open. I do a lot of couples work. I do a lot of trauma. I do a lot of people who are in recovery, just whatever.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. All right. Well, have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Likewise. You too.